Captain Alex Ironclad Monroe rubbed his temples as the shrill, warbling voice of a glugworm diplomat reverberated through his comm unit. The creature, a gelatinous mass of translucent blue, jiggled indignantly on the holographic screen before him. Unfair slime regulations. Do you know what this means for our exports? Discrimination against glugworms is not only unethical but utterly slimy-phobic. Alex glanced at the clock on his console, realizing he was already 20 minutes behind schedule. The day had just started, and he was already knee-deep in intergalactic nonsense. With a calm tone that betrayed his growing frustration, he replied, "Ambassador Sloop, I assure you the Trade Committee will reevaluate the viscosity standards. For now, please refrain from threatening a slime embargo." Sloop jiggled ominously before cutting the transmission. Alex sighed, leaning back in his chair. Being the human liaison officer on Space Station Sigma Prime sounded prestigious in theory, managing peace between 20 different species on the galactic frontier. In practice, it meant he was everyone's favorite scapegoat. Humans, with their reputation for tolerating madness, were expected to mediate disputes, enforce treaties, and occasionally, as he'd learned, deal with slime embargoes. The calm was short-lived. His console beeped urgently, and the disembodied voice of Security Chief Vega crackled through. "Captain Monroe, we have a situation. Docking Bay 7. Draken ambassador ship just arrived unannounced." Alex froze. The Draken were not the kind of species you wanted dropping by unexpectedly. Apex predators in every sense, they were dragon-like beings with razor-sharp intellects and sharper claws. Their ambassadors weren't just diplomats, they were warriors who commanded respect through sheer dominance. Unannounced? Did they say why? They didn't, Vega replied, voice laced with irritation. But they're demanding your presence. Immediately. Rising from his seat, Alex grabbed his comm and bolted toward the docking bay. As he walked briskly through the crowded corridors, a sense of dread crept over him. The Draken never made demands lightly. If they were here, it wasn't for a casual visit. By the time Alex arrived, the atmosphere in Docking Bay 7 was thick with tension. The Draken ambassadorial ship loomed like a metallic beast, its dark hull gleaming under the station's artificial lights. Standing at the base of the ship's ramp were two imposing Draken figures. Their scales shimmered in shades of obsidian and emerald, their golden eyes narrowing as Alex approached. Ambassadors Therax and Jira Alex greeted, keeping his tone neutral and his posture straight. "Welcome to Sigma Prime. What brings you here on such short notice?" Therax, the larger of the two, stepped forward. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Our presence here is not for idle chatter, human. The summit of the Triune Alliance demands our attendance, but we are burdened with an urgent matter." Sierra, slightly smaller but no less intimidating, unfurled her wings slightly, a gesture Alex knew was meant to command attention. "Our hatchlings require supervision. We have determined that humans possess the resilience necessary for this task." Alex blinked, certain he'd misheard. Hatchlings. As if on cue, a trio of small Draken bounded down the ship's ramp. They were tiny by Draken standards, each barely the size of a large dog, but their presence was anything but small. Their scales glinted like molten metal, and their wings, though still developing, gleamed with razor-sharp edges. One of them let out a curious chirp, followed by a puff of smoke. Another playfully snapped its tiny jaws at a maintenance drone, which wisely retreated. Blaze, Ember, and Sparks Zira introduced, gesturing to the trio with a clawed hand. They are spirited, but they require constant supervision to prevent incidents. Alex stared at the hatchlings, who were now sniffing around his boots, their sharp talons clicking on the metal floor. With all due respect, he began cautiously. Humans aren't exactly known for handling apex predator children. Surely there's someone more qualified. Therax's growl cut him off. "You misunderstand. This is not a request. It is an assignment. Fail and the consequences will be regrettable." Alex swallowed hard. He glanced at Vega, who was hovering near the edge of the bay, clearly enjoying his discomfort. Taking a deep breath, Alex plastered on his best diplomatic smile. Of course. Sigma Prime is honored to assist. We'll ensure your hatchlings are well cared for during the summit. The hatchlings chirped in unison, a sound that might have been adorable if it didn't also involve small sparks of fire erupting from their nostrils. Alex felt a sinking sensation in his gut. As the ambassadors departed, leaving their offspring behind, Alex muttered under his breath, babysitting apex predators. What's next? Teething black holes. The hatchlings wasted no time asserting their dominance. Blaze, the boldest of the three, had already started gnawing on a cargo crate. Ember flapped her wings experimentally, sending loose papers and tools scattering across the bay. Sparks, the smallest but clearly the brains of the operation, eyed Alex with a curiosity that made him deeply uncomfortable. Vega sauntered over, arms crossed. Looks like you've got your hands full, Captain. Alex shot her a glare. You think? Any chance you want to share the glory? Not a chance, Vega replied with a smirk. Good luck, Ironclad. As Alex tried to corral the hatchlings, he couldn't help but reflect on humanity's reputation in the galaxy. Somewhere along the line, humans had earned the dubious distinction of being the species crazy enough to handle the galaxy's most dangerous problems. Whether it was diffusing interstellar conflicts or babysitting fire-breathing toddlers, the logic seemed to be if it's a bad idea, give it to the humans. The hatchlings, meanwhile, were proving every bit as chaotic as Alex had feared. Blaze managed to pry open a control panel, emitting a triumphant roar as sparks flew. Ember discovered the joys of clawing at a metal crate, leaving deep gouges in its surface. Sparks, to Alex's horror, had figured out how to activate a cargo drone and was now riding it like a personal hovercraft. Okay, Alex muttered, chasing after the drone. New plan. Contain the chaos, survive the day, and pray I don't end up as a footnote in Draken history. By the time he wrangled the hatchlings into a secure play area, Alex was covered in soot, scratches, and what he sincerely hoped wasn't hatchling drool. As he locked the reinforced door behind him, he slumped against the wall, exhausted. Human insanity, he murmured to himself. That's what they call it, right? Let's hope it's enough. The hatchlings, now safely contained, chirped in unison, their mischievous eyes glinting. Alex had a sinking feeling that his day was far from over. Alex leaned against the reinforced wall of the play module, watching the three hatchlings with a wary eye. The station's engineers had assured him that this area was childproof, though he suspected they'd never had to deal with Draken hatchlings. Blaze, Ember, and Sparks darted around the room with the boundless energy of kittens, but their antics were far more destructive. Their sharp claws left gouges in the metal floor, and their wings, though still small, cut through the air like blades. They were a chaotic blend of kittens, velociraptors, and live flamethrowers, and Alex wasn't sure which part terrified him most. Blaze, the boldest, seemed to be the ringleader. He prowled around, sniffing at every corner and testing the limits of the space. Ember followed close behind, her curious chirps punctuated by the occasional puff of smoke. Sparks, the smallest but clearly the smartest, perched atop a control console, her glowing eyes scanning the room with unsettling intelligence. Alex had barely managed to coax her off the drone earlier, and now she looked ready to commandeer something else. All right, you little terrors, Alex muttered, tossing a synthetic meat stick toward Blaze in hopes of distracting him. This is your playground. Try not to burn it down. For a moment, it seemed to work. Blaze chomped on the meat stick, Ember circled a pile of toys, and Sparks appeared engrossed in a shiny piece of scrap metal. Alex allowed himself a rare moment of relief, sinking into a chair by the wall. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as disastrous as he'd feared. That illusion shattered within minutes. Blaze, ever the troublemaker, wandered over to a panel on the far wall and began clawing at it. Alex bolted upright, shouting, "Hey, that's not a chew toy," but it was too late. Blaze's sharp talons had found the right sequence of wires, and with a triumphant roar, he yanked them loose. The room immediately plunged into chaos. The gravity fluctuated wildly, sending Alex and the hatchlings floating into the air. The environmental controls sputtered, activating the sprinklers, which sprayed freezing water in all directions. Lights flickered, and a high-pitched alarm blared, adding to the pandemonium. Blaze, Ember, and Sparks reacted to the sudden weightlessness with unrestrained glee. They chirped and squealed, twisting and turning in the zero-G like fish in water. Blaze let out a small jet of fire, which illuminated the sprinkler mist in a dazzling, if highly dangerous, display. Ember discovered she could use her wings to propel herself faster, and Sparks managed to grab hold of Alex's comm device, chittering triumphantly as she floated out of reach. Of course, Alex grumbled, flailing to grab onto something solid. If I survive this, I'm applying for a desk job on Earth. He finally managed to snag a railing and pull himself down, planting his boots against the wall to steady himself. Blaze was gnawing on the loose wires. Ember had found a stash of spare parts to toss around, and Sparks was now using the comm device to make chirping noises that sounded suspiciously like mocking laughter. "All right, enough of this," Alex muttered, pulling out the emergency override on his console. It took a few frantic moments of button mashing, but he finally restored gravity. The hatchlings dropped to the floor with a series of indignant chirps, and Alex collapsed into a puddle of water and soot. The calm didn't last long. While Blaze and Ember tussled over a piece of scrap metal, Sparks began sniffing around the room, her small, razor-sharp wings flaring slightly. She growled at a maintenance bot as it trundled past, then turned her attention to a stack of crates in the corner. Blaze and Ember quickly followed, their playful demeanor shifting to something more focused. Alex watched them curiously, wiping water from his face. "What now?" he muttered, dragging himself to his feet. The hatchlings were circling the crates, sniffing and growling in unison. Alex frowned. It almost looked like they were hunting something. "Hey, leave that alone," he said, walking over to shoo them away. The hatchlings hissed in protest but didn't budge. Sparks scratched at the side of one crate, her claws making an unsettling metallic screech. Alex sighed, reaching for his scanner. "Fine, let's see what's got your attention." As soon as the scanner lit up, Alex's stomach dropped. The crates were shielded, which meant their contents weren't supposed to be there. That alone was bad enough, but the faint energy signature leaking through the shielding was far worse. He tapped his comm, only to remember Sparks still had it. "Great," he muttered, pulling a second scanner from his belt. He ran it over the crate again, this time confirming his worst fears: illegal plasma detonators. His mind raced as he stared at the glowing readout. "Oh, great! We've upgraded from babysitting to bomb disposal." Before he could react, Blaze took matters into his own claws. With a fierce growl, the hatchling slashed at the crate's corner, ripping it open. Alex lunged forward, shouting, "No, stop," but it was too late. The crate toppled, spilling its contents onto the floor. Dozens of small, sleek devices clattered out, each one glowing faintly with an ominous blue light. The hatchlings froze for a moment, staring at the devices. Then, as if sensing the danger, they backed away, growling softly. Alex crouched by the crate, his mind racing. Who in their right mind would smuggle plasma detonators onto Sigma Prime? And why? Before he could formulate a plan, Sparks darted forward, her tiny claws snatching one of the detonators. "No, no, no," Alex shouted, scrambling after her. Sparks chirped mischievously, darting out of reach and tossing the device to Blaze, who caught it in his jaws. Alex's heart nearly stopped. "Put that down," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Blaze tilted his head, then gently set the device on the floor, staring at Alex as if to say, "What's the big deal?" By some miracle, the detonator didn't go off. Alex exhaled shakily, carefully picking it up and placing it back in the crate. "Okay," he muttered, his hands trembling. "This is officially above my pay grade." The hatchlings, seemingly bored now that the detonators were out of reach, wandered back to their toys. Alex slumped against the wall, staring at the mess. Water still dripped from the ceiling, scorch marks marred the walls, and a pile of plasma detonators sat ominously in the corner. "This is fine," Alex said to himself, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Just another day at the office. Babysitting flamethrower toddlers and dismantling smuggling rings. Totally normal." He glanced at the hatchlings, who were now curled up together, chirping softly as they drifted off to sleep. Despite the chaos, there was something almost endearing about them. Alex sighed, shaking his head. "You're lucky you're cute." As the room finally fell silent, Alex tapped his comm retrieved from Sparks's grasp and called security. "Vega," he said, his voice weary, "you're going to want to send a team down here and bring containment units. We've got a situation." Alex sat on the damp floor of the play module, staring at the open crate of plasma detonators. The hatchlings were huddled together in a corner, blissfully unaware of the gravity of the situation they had uncovered. His mind raced, piecing together the implications. Plasma detonators were banned on Sigma Prime for a reason. They could take out an entire sector of the station if detonated. This wasn't a simple smuggling operation. Someone had brought these here to sabotage the station. He tapped his comm, still damp from Sparks's earlier escapades, and called Vega. "We've got a bigger problem than I thought. These aren't just random contraband. Someone's planning to blow up the station." Vega's voice crackled back, sharp and tense. "I'm sending a team. Lock down the area and don't let anyone in or out." "Lock it down?" "I'm babysitting walking flamethrowers who just broke into a crate of illegal explosives. That ship's already sailed." Before Vega could respond, a low growl from Sparks drew Alex's attention. The hatchlings were no longer lounging. They had their noses to the ground, sniffing intently, their wings twitching with anticipation. Sparks let out a sharp chirp and bolted toward the door. Blaze and Ember followed, their claws clicking against the floor as they moved with surprising coordination. "Hey, wait!" Alex scrambled to his feet, but the hatchlings were already out the door. He cursed under his breath, grabbing his gear and sprinting after them. Of course. Why not make this worse? The hatchlings darted into the maintenance tunnels, their small forms disappearing into the dimly lit maze of pipes and cables. Alex followed, his boots echoing loudly in the confined space. The tunnels were narrow and cramped, forcing him to crouch as he moved. Sweat dripped down his face as he tried to keep up with the hatchlings, whose speed and agility far outmatched his own. "Slow down," he shouted, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. The hatchlings didn't listen. Instead, they seemed to be following a trail, their sharp claws scraping against the floor as they sniffed and growled. Alex's heart pounded. If they were tracking whoever brought the detonators onto the station, they might lead him straight to the culprits or into even more trouble. The chase took a sharp turn when Blaze leapt up to a higher level of the tunnel, using his wings to propel himself onto a maintenance platform. Ember and Sparks followed, their movements fluid and instinctive. Alex groaned, climbing awkwardly after them. By the time he pulled himself up, the hatchlings were already disappearing around another corner. When he caught up, it wasn't hard to see why they'd stopped. The hatchlings were crouched at the entrance to a storage bay, their eyes glowing faintly in the low light. Inside, a group of smugglers huddled around a makeshift workstation, arguing in hushed tones. Alex crept forward, keeping to the shadows. "Are you sure this'll work?" one smuggler whispered, glancing nervously at the crates of detonators stacked against the wall. "It has to," another replied. "Once the charges go off, the entire trade sector will be in chaos. No one will suspect us until it's too late." Alex's stomach churned. He had to act fast, but before he could come up with a plan, the hatchlings made their move. With a unified roar, Blaze, Ember, and Sparks charged into the room. The smugglers froze, their eyes wide with terror as the three miniature dragons bore down on them. "Don't move," one smuggler hissed, trembling. "Their vision is based on movement." Alex stepped into the room, leaning casually against the doorway. "Actually, it's based on the heat signatures of idiots like you." Blaze leapt onto the nearest crate, his claws scraping against the wood as he let out a burst of fire. The smugglers scattered, tripping over each other in their panic. Sparks darted around them, herding them into a corner like a tiny, winged sheepdog. Ember, meanwhile, climbed onto the control panel of their escape ship, her claws slicing through the wires with surgical precision. Sparks flew as the ship's engines sputtered and died. Alex moved quickly, securing the nearest smuggler with a pair of cuffs. "You know," he said, glancing at the chaos around him, "this probably would have gone smoother if you hadn't brought explosives into a station full of apex predator babies." The smugglers didn't respond, too busy trying to avoid the hatchlings. Blaze roared again, melting the lock on the storage bay door with a precise blast of fire. Sparks snapped her jaws at a smuggler who tried to make a run for it, driving him back toward the others. Alex couldn't help but feel a grudging sense of admiration. The hatchlings were surprisingly effective at rounding up criminals, albeit with a bit more collateral damage than he'd prefer. By the time Vega and her security team arrived, the situation was mostly under control. The smugglers were huddled together, their hands raised in surrender, while the hatchling sat triumphantly atop the crates of plasma detonators. Blaze was chewing on a piece of melted metal, Ember was preening her wings, and Sparks was gnawing on what appeared to be a smuggler's comm device. Vega surveyed the scene, her expression a mix of disbelief and exasperation. "Let me guess," she said, turning to Alex. "The hatchlings did most of the work." Alex shrugged. "I like to think of myself as the cleanup crew. They've got the instincts. I just try to keep them from setting the station on fire." As if on cue, Blaze let out a small puff of smoke, which promptly set off the storage bay's fire suppression system. Water sprayed from the ceiling, drenching everyone in the room. Alex wiped his face and sighed. "See what I mean?" The smugglers were hauled off, the detonators secured, and the hatchlings were finally corralled back into their reinforced play module. Alex sat on the floor outside the module, his clothes soaked and his nerves frayed. Despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride. The hatchlings had stumbled onto a major sabotage plot and played a crucial role in stopping it. Sure, they'd also caused extensive property damage, but that was par for the course at this point. As he leaned back against the wall, Blaze, Ember, and Sparks peered at him through the glass of the module. Their eyes glinted with curiosity, and Alex could have sworn they were smiling. "Little heroes, big trouble," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's what you are." The station was safe, for now, but Alex had a sinking feeling this wouldn't be the last time the hatchlings dragged him into chaos. Alex stood in the middle of the crowded briefing room, his uniform still damp and singed from the events of the day. Around him, station officials argued, their voices rising above the soft hum of the room's ventilation system. On one side of the table, Chief Engineer Lorak waved a datapad covered in damage reports. On the other, Ambassador Tharox and Sierra sat calmly, their imposing presence silencing anyone foolish enough to speak over them. Meanwhile, the hatchlings were sprawled on the floor behind Alex, chewing on pieces of scrap metal they had liberated from somewhere. "This is unacceptable," Lorak exclaimed, slamming his datapad onto the table. "We're talking about melted bulkheads, a fire in the cafeteria, and an entire maintenance tunnel that needs to be decontaminated. Do you have any idea what this will cost?" Alex raised a hand, his tone dry. To be fair, the cafeteria fire wasn't entirely their fault. Blaze sneezed near a vat of flammable oil. That could have happened to anyone. Blaze looked up at the sound of his name, his tiny wings flapping as he chirped innocently. Lorak's glare could have melted steel. "Captain Monroe, this isn't a joke. The damage caused by these creatures is extensive, not to mention the risk they pose to station security." Ambassador Tharox leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. "You dare to insult our offspring? The hatchlings have proven themselves more capable than your so-called security team. They uncovered a plot that your systems failed to detect." Enriched, Azira added, her voice smooth and cutting. "Our young have never been more enriched than during their time here." Alex fought the urge to laugh. He wasn't sure how property damage and plasma detonators qualified as enrichment, but he wasn't about to argue with the Draken ambassadors. Instead, he focused on keeping the peace. "Let's not lose sight of the big picture," he said, raising his voice slightly. "Yes, there was damage, but we also stopped a major sabotage plot, thanks to the hatchlings. Maybe there's something to learn from this." A soft growl interrupted him. Alex turned to see Sparks climbing onto the table, her claws scraping against the polished surface. She sniffed at a stack of paperwork in front of a particularly irritable bureaucrat, then sneezed. Flames erupted, and the documents went up in a spectacular burst of fire. The room descended into chaos as people scrambled for extinguishers. Alex calmly grabbed a nearby cup of water and doused the flames. "See," he said, turning back to the group as if nothing had happened. "With proper guidance, they're just misunderstood." The hatchlings chirped in unison, clearly pleased with themselves. Alex couldn't help but smile. Despite everything, he had grown attached to the little terrors. They were destructive, unpredictable, and a constant source of stress, but they were also clever, brave, and dare he say it, endearing. As the room quieted, an idea began to form in his mind. It was insane. But then again, most of his best ideas were. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward. "Look, we've proven that humans can handle situations other species wouldn't dare touch. What if we leaned into that? Instead of just reacting to chaos, what if we turned it into a strength?" Lorak raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" "A formal program," Alex said, warming to the idea. "A daycare/training facility for high-risk alien youth. We'd offer a safe environment for species like the Draken to develop their young while benefiting from humanity's unique adaptability." Syra tilted her head, her golden eyes gleaming with interest. "You propose turning this station into a facility for nurturing apex predators." "Not just apex predators," Alex clarified. "Any species with challenging offspring. Think of it as a diplomatic initiative. We'd be building goodwill across the galaxy while also fostering better interspecies understanding." "And what happens when another hatchling melts half the station?" Lorak demanded. "We'll learn as we go," Alex said with a shrug. "Look, we're already handling the worst of it. With the right resources, we can turn this chaos into something productive." The room fell silent as the officials mulled over his proposal. Therox was the first to speak, his rumbling voice filling the space. "It is unconventional, but the potential benefits are significant." Syra nodded. "Our young have thrived here. If humans can truly harness their potential, this could be a valuable alliance." Lorak groaned, rubbing his temples. "You're all insane," maybe Alex said, smiling faintly. "But isn't that why humanity's here in the first place?" It took hours of debate, but in the end, the proposal was approved. The station would be rebranded as the Galactic Institute for Apex Youth Development, with Alex appointed as its first director. As the meeting adjourned, he found himself standing alone in the briefing room, the enormity of what he'd just agreed to finally sinking in. The hatchlings padded over, circling him with happy chirps. Blaze nudged his hand, Ember tugged at his sleeve, and Sparks dropped a slightly charred piece of metal at his feet, a gift, perhaps. Alex crouched down, scratching Blaze behind the horns. "Looks like we're stuck with each other, huh?" The hatchlings chirped in agreement, and Alex couldn't help but laugh. They'd turned his life upside down, but in a strange way, they'd also given him a new purpose. Who needed quiet diplomacy when you had flaming toddlers? As he led the hatchlings back to their module, Alex caught sight of his reflection in a nearby viewport. His uniform was scorched, his hair was a mess, and he had a smear of soot across his face. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of accomplishment. "You know," he said to the hatchlings, who trailed behind him like ducklings, "this might actually work." Blaze let out a puff of smoke, and Alex waved it away with a grin. There was no turning back now.